Alright guys, what we are here to talk about is we've actually had some pretty damn good receivers. Not a bunch of receivers that have blown the socks off the NFL. The receivers that I'm picking for the most part are either based, it's not all based on NFL, what they did in the NFL. It's not all based on their physical skills, and it's not even all based on the number charts. If I was really picking these wide receivers that I chose, it's like, okay, I'm just going to go down the top 5 or 10 list of who put up the most numbers in school history, and I'm not doing it that way. I'm picking the guys that were kind of an amalgam of everything, whether it be the pros, whether it be the numbers, and how they felt within the game, or just physical attributes. I look at some of these players and actually how they ended up being in the NFL. Quincy Enunwa is one of them, but he was a team captain. He was 6th in school history in receptions. And I think everybody remembers the game that he had in the Gator Bowl, where he was the Gator Bowl MVP against Georgia in 2014. But it wasn't so much just the numbers he put up in college. And Quincy Enunwa was one of those guys that felt like a threat. He felt like a threat because, well, he proved it. He proved it because he was a fighter. He was a fighter for those jump balls. Now in the pros, he didn't put up a ton of numbers in the pros. He was a consistent player for the New York Jets, and he was a consistent starter and/or a backup. But big, physical, and ginormous hands. Definitely a 4'4", 4'5" cat. Him being a team captain also says where his head was at. Alright, Mr. OBJ, Mr. White OBJ for the University of Nebraska, Jordan Westerkamp. Another receiver under Bo Pelini, who was first team All-Big Ten as a receiver, right? Team captain, had the right head on his shoulders. He had the most 100-yard games, 36 games in a row with reception. And what was so much fun about him, with his 167 receptions, 2,474 yards, 18 receiving touchdowns with a 15-yard per catch average. What was fun about him was the highlight catches that he was making. You see Kenny Bell making some highlight receptions, you see Stanley Morgan making some highlight catches, but complete Odell Beckham Jr. style, just laying out one-handed catches. His Hail Mary catch, behind his back catch, which you see, he was so much fun. And to be honest, I just remember watching a lot of these receivers and thinking, these receivers are really good, but man, it's just, why can't we get in a system and a routine to where these guys are flourishing even more? To a certain degree, it just felt like there was always something lacking. But you cannot take away from what Westerkamp was able to do. I think he played for the Cincinnati Bengals for a little while too. At least he was on the roster. You can't take away what he was doing in terms of just legendary games and legendary catches that he had. Anyway, moving on. This one's a given. Everybody knows this one. And I know I'm being super original with this one. But Johnny the Jet Rodgers. Mr. Heisman. Mr. Walter Camp Award winner. He is still to this day, well, obviously because the conference is null and void anymore in the Big 8, but he was the top wide receiver, yardage-wise, and kick returner in Big 8 history in terms of numbers. He holds NCAA records in punt returns and TDs with 7, and most kick return TDs with 9. What's fascinating about him is not only during that time period in the 1970s, where, I'm sorry, they're not 2019 LSU where they're throwing the ball every other down. For him to put up the numbers that he put up was pretty impressive. At 154 catches, 2,674 yards, a 17-yard average, and 27 touchdowns. 27 touchdowns. That is incredible. During a time period where you don't see cats putting up those kind of yards. You just don't. And numbers and touchdowns, reception-wise. Was not only did they split him out, but also they put him in the backfield a lot. I don't know exactly why he didn't end up becoming something bigger in the pros. I think it was because he had injury issues. But for the most part, during that time period is enough to give him props for the numbers that he put up during that time period. Props to Johnny. Of course, the guy that was walking shoulder to shoulder with Stanley Morgan Jr., J.D. Spielman. Now, J.D. Spielman left, because I guess he had depression issues, but J.D. Spielman left early. And he famously was kind of one of the guys that said, he called out Frost when he was gone. He basically said, the problem is you. At the time, it's just like, well, piss off, dude. It's your loss. In hindsight, J.D. Spielman had something to say, and it was right. Because obviously somebody was not getting any better, and his negligence, Frost's negligence, is come out now, and it's like, all right, it makes sense. Stanley Morgan Jr. just said the hell with this. Or not Stanley Morgan, but J.D. Spielman just said the hell with this. You know, he was this close to breaking Stanley Morgan Jr.'s receiving record, and he said the hell with that. I don't even want it. I'm leaving. Now he went to TCU and he didn't do much, and then he's out of football. He's not even playing football anymore. But at the end of the day, it's like you can't deny the numbers that he put up. He was a freshman All-American. He set the freshman receiving record at Nebraska with 53. He was a punt return freak. You know, and the numbers that he put up was 170 career receptions for 2,546 yards, 15 touchdowns, and a 15-yard average. And he always kind of felt like the deep threat. He always felt like a guy that if he had a crease, his sprinting speed was going to be able to clear it. And what always kind of blew me away about him was, like, it kind of blew my mind sometimes, like how J.D. Spielman was able to just wiggle around guys, you know, because he had just such quick little feet. You know, he may not have looked like a Barry Sanders in terms of separation from one foot to the next as he's planting. You know, like, he was keeping his feet together and close and making sharp cuts, and he was making guys miss, just with kind of like a little shimmy and a shake and a little juke, and it was deceptive. It was deceptive, and it was impressive. And obviously, what he was doing was working, because he put up numbers, and he would be the all-time leading receiver right now if he would have stayed one more year. Even if some people see him as a traitor or whatever, obviously in hindsight, Frost being fired, the reason he left was justified. So nobody could hold any animosity towards him. He put up numbers, and he'd be, in my opinion, he's not Nebraska's all-time leading receiver, but he might as well be, because we know if he would have stayed, he would have broke the record. Whatever, props to that little guy. Maurice Purified during the Bill Callahan days. He didn't put up a lot of numbers per se. He was only with Nebraska for 2 years. And you want to talk about a game changer? Playing with Zach Taylor, Mr. Zach Taylor for the Cincinnati Bengals coach. You know, some of the stuff that he did for college. You know, he was a second team All Big 12. And what did he put up? He put up he had 91 receptions for 1,444 yards, for a 16-yard average a catch and 16 touchdowns. He was so big, 6'4", 220, 230 pounds. Couldn't run like a deer per se, but he could jump like a deer. Ginormous hands. He did go to the NFL, but he ended up actually going to the Arena Football League and set insane records at the Arena Football League. But partly why I put him on this list was he was kind of, in my view, he was kind of a pendulum swing from the 90s, late 90s, where all we did was run. He was kind of the representation of Nebraska switching to NFL prototype receivers. And he produced. He was a threat. You know, the type of game that he put up against Texas A&M and a couple of the games, like he was a legit threat that every defense had to respect. Regardless of how you feel about the Bill Callahan era, you know, kind of like present day, it's one of those things when we look back on it, with an exception of a couple individual players, we probably would rather forget about it. But Maurice Purified to me was one of those bright spots. I'm going to throw you off on this one a little bit, because again, I'm talking about systems. I'm talking about systems and how the role that they played within the offensive systems that they had, right? I don't care if you're running the ball 99 times and you throw it once. If you're making plays, you keep the sticks moving. I'm trying to put you on this list. Matt Davison. And I'm not putting him on this list just because he, had the miracle at Missouri. I'm not putting him on that for this, all right? Matt Davison always felt like such an overachiever. He wasn't straight line fast. He wasn't big. He wasn't strong per se. He wasn't a good route runner. Like, what he was smart, knew his angles, and the dude was sure-handed. That dude never dropped the ball. I think I saw him drop one ball his entire career. He didn't put up crazy numbers because he was playing during the time period when Nebraska was running the ball more than it ever had before. They were running the ball, I swear to God, 85-90% of the time. So naturally, Matt Davison wasn't going to put up a lot of numbers. Kept the sticks moving and could always come up with that sure catch whenever it was needed. Matt Davison was that guy. I swear to God, that guy. Like I said, he didn't put up crazy numbers, but he put up 93 receptions for 1,456 yards and 6 touchdowns. He backed defenses off the line of scrimmage when there were 9, 10 guys in the box. He was one person that was backing the defense up to where it allowed us to run our system the way it was supposed to. And to be honest, he wasn't flashy, he wasn't sexy, he wasn't the greatest athlete, but he was sure-handed, And he did what Nebraska needed, and he did it well. He did it very consistently, which was crazy. We're going back to old school here with probably the best receiver in terms of NFL credentials Nebraska's ever had. And that's Mr. Scoring Explosion, 1983 Irving Fryar, who kind of like, say, Matt Davison, even though Matt Davison didn't play in the NFL at all. Irving Fryar was one of those guys that did not put up a lot of numbers, but they used Irving Fryar kind of how they used Johnny Rodgers. You know, they put him in the backfield, they put him in a lot of end arounds, they threw him deep with fly patterns a lot, but for the most part he didn't put up a lot of numbers until the NFL, where he was the number 1 NFL draft pick. Irving Fryar, he had 67 receptions in his career for 1,196 yards, 18-yard average, and 11 touchdowns. He's in the NFL Hall of Fame. He was an All-American. He was an All-American in college, so I guess for the most part, despite numbers, he still was doing his thing. But most of what made Irving Fryar special was kind of what he did in the NFL. You know, some of the stuff that he ended up doing, you know, that he holds records for was, let's see, he caught 211 yards in a single half. He's one of the oldest players to score 4 touchdowns in a single game. And the numbers that he put up in the NFL was 851 receptions for 12,785 yards and 84 touchdowns in the NFL. Like I said, not only was he an All-American for the NFL, or an All-American for Nebraska, and was on one of the best Nebraska teams Nebraska's ever had in 1983 with the Scoring Explosion, but for him to go into the NFL and become what he became, you can't keep him off this list. He's the offensive Ndamukong Suh is what he is, right? Ndamukong Suh put up crazy numbers in college and put up crazy numbers in the NFL. Irving Fryar, modest numbers in college, but was so talented, highly drafted, first player picked, and ended up just doing crazy numbers in the NFL. Irving Fryar, beast. All right, these last 3, they're kind of automatics, you know what I mean? And so what I was talking about earlier, Stanley Morgan Jr., you know, being the all-time leader. Who do we kind of forget who's an all-time leader? Well, it feels like to me that sometimes he's easily forgotten. Kenny Bell. Now, I'm one of those cats that I pay attention to, or I look sometimes at how they move. I look at how they move, I look at their stride, I look at the way they run their routes, all those things. And I could never really get on the Kenny Bell train, even though he was putting up crazy numbers. He didn't look fast per se, he didn't look loose in the hips, and he didn't really look like he came out of his cuts hard, you know? What do I know? Because obviously he was doing something right. He was outrunning guys, he was making leaping catches over people's heads, and he put up numbers. At the time, he was the all-time leader until Stanley Morgan Jr. broke his record. But, you know, he was all Big Ten. As bad as Nebraska, for the most part, has been for the Big Ten, Bo Pelini, and a lot of what he did early on in the Big Ten, we tend to forget about. And Kenny Bell, as an example, being one of the guys, as a receiver, being all Big Ten, first team all Big Ten, is saying something. You know, he had 181 receptions, career receptions for 2,689 yards, 21 career touchdowns, and a 15-yard average. What made him such a cool player was his attitude. Still to this day, one of the greatest blocks we've ever seen was that block that he had in the Big 12 or Big Ten championship against Wisconsin. That peel back block where he basically killed the guy. Nowadays, even though that was a legal hit, nowadays that would be flagged just because it was such a brutal hit. His mentality, his work ethic, he guy was sure-handed, making one-handed catches on a regular basis. A lot of the players that came out of the Bo Pelini era need to be remembered. Tom Osborne, Frank Solich, and Bo Pelini. Regardless of that people may or may not like about Bo Pelini, the longer history goes on, you gotta love that guy. Alright, moving on. Arguably, he's on the Cincinnati Bengals. He's number 2 on their roster, Cincinnati Bengals. And he's probably one of the most well-rounded receivers Nebraska's ever had. Of course, Stanley Morgan Jr. From a route running standpoint, sure hands, big hands, physical, strong, making tough catches, acrobatic catches. So with Stanley Morgan Jr., the guy had 189 catches for 2,747 yards for a 14.5 yard average and 22 touchdowns. And he played during the time period where, how many coaches would go through? I think he was at the tail end of Bo Pelini's career, and he was with Mike Riley, and then he was with Scott Frost. But he put up numbers with whoever he was with, no matter what. Offensive line changes, quarterback changes, he always found a way to put up numbers, which was very impressive. Very impressive. And he was one of those cats. He's kind of one of those receivers that you just wish you could have forever. You know, if college football was the NFL, it's like, can we keep this guy for as long as possible until he's an old man and he retires? You know, Stanley Morgan's one of those cats. And then, of course, we have Trey Palmer. He's the one that inspired me to want to do this list. So, I mean, he is now officially the all-time leading receiver. In a single season, he broke the record. But have we ever seen anybody that is like him? I mean, yeah, okay, he's not a Quincy Enunwa or a Stanley Morgan that is incredibly hard to jam and physical off the line of scrimmage. No, he's not. But you can see in the way he runs routes and his pacing and his ability to swim past you and his just pure speed. Nobody can stay with him. Nebraska's never had one of those. Like, yeah, we have had fast receivers. We have had receivers that were considered the fastest guys on the team. With a lot of those receivers, it didn't really mean anything. It was like, okay, they're the fastest guys, so what? They're not catching any balls, they're not beating anybody on fly patterns, they're not outrunning anybody, and they're not making huge, ginormous plays. They're not setting records, they're not setting individual game records, they're not setting individual season records, they're not doing any of that, right? So what is speed if you can't really use it? He's been the one blazing straight line speed receiver Nebraska's ever had that actually produced. I mean, I haven't heard what his times are in terms of 40-yard time, blah, 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 but results are there. The inability of guys not being able to stay with him at all, it's all there. And anyway, of course, Trey Palmer, he inspired it, so naturally I'm going to put him on the starting four. It's a given. And if he would have been here longer than just 1 year, heaven forbid that we actually have an offensive line that can keep quarterback up and healthy. Yeah, he's probably the best guy that we've had next to Irving Fryer. So, you guys, I want to hear from you guys, your opinion out of these receivers, and you could throw some other guys out there if you wanted to. These receivers, I want to know, who would be your top four? If you had to put a starting lineup, say you're doing a three starting receivers, one backup, or two starting receivers and then two backups, etc., whatever. Say you're going to be doing that. Out of these guys that I just listed, who is going to be your starting four? Different characteristics of each individual receiver to balance and complement each other, right? Me personally, you cannot, from a fly pattern standpoint, you cannot, from what Trey Palmer's done, and his straight line speed. So boom, there's the first one, Trey Palmer. Trey Palmer's definitely in it. Yeah, there's recency bias there, but can you argue? Everything that he had to deal with, can you argue with that? Worst offensive line ever, quarterback injury issues on a regular basis, never had any time when we did have Casey Thompson in there. Like, he was literally getting hit when he threw the ball on a regular basis. The other guy that I'm putting out there, again, we're talking dynamics here, in terms of complementary style receivers. Enunwa is definitely going to be on my list because of his size, physicality, and just sure-handedness. And the next one that I'm going with is Jordan Westerkamp. I feel like if he would have been put in a different system, he would have flourished. His sure-handedness and his ability to go after, hit high points at where the ball was and beat beat corners for that ball. I don't think we saw how good he really is at that. So yeah, I think Jordan Westerkamp, by and large, he's my number 3 guy. He's on there too. All right, and the last one, I struggle with this one because I want to pay homage to old school, right? I want to pay homage to old school, even though I never got to watch them play. I wanted to put Purify there because of his size, length, leaping ability, sure hands. I wanted to put him there, but imagine Irving Fryer. Imagine Irving Fryer. Imagine him in today's systems in college. Imagine him in a Whipple offense. Imagine, assuming the offensive line can block. Imagine him in Callahan's offenses, whatever. Irving Fryer would have just been a killer. Route running ability, that was one of his specialities, was his route running ability and coming out of cuts. And of course, you can't negate, he's an NFL Hall of Famer with the kind of numbers he put up in the NFL, which is crazy. So there you go. You got Trey Palmer, you got Jordan Westerkamp, you got Irving Fryer, and you got Quincy Enunwa. Well, that's my starting list. What do you guys think? Who's the 4 guys that you would choose? Alright guys, well, you tell me if I missed anybody, whether it be off this list or somebody that I missed, let me know. Anyway, I love you. Long live Nebraska. Peace.